Right, so formally welcome everyone to our weekly call. Thank you all for joining. As you're hopefully aware, this week we're going to start the call, which will be longer than our normal duration. I'm envisaging we may run to 90 minutes. We won't run beyond that, but this will allow a little more time than our normal hour. Our focus is going to be principally on DELEG. We're going to have a panel discussion. So in a moment, I'll hand over to Ralf Weber from Akamai, who will kick off. Ralf being one of the co-authors of the original DELEG proposal, the current internet draft, coming out of the hackathon couple of IETF meetings ago, I think. Was it Prague? I think it came
Yes,
out of.
Prague.
Goodness for that. So Ralf will kick off just to give an overview so that everyone's up to speed on what DELEG is, and then probably in this order, I'll ask firstly Paul Mockapetris to give his take on the proposal. Then Paul Vixie, and finally, if he has joined us, Jeff Houston. So from what I know of each of you, I think you have slightly different views on the topic, which will make it more interesting discussion. We'll give you sort of 5 minutes or well, certainly less than 10 minutes to sort of share your point of view, and then we'll open up to a wider discussion with questions and comments from others on the call, including at least one other co-author of the draft. So we'll make sure that there's plenty of time for a wider discussion. If anyone's not able to ask a question on the mic, then feel free to pop it into the chat, and I'll read it out loud as we run on. And I'm hoping that Brett fixes his audio problem and video problem by the look of it. But yeah, if not, I'll take it out of the chat, Brett. So feel free to pop anything in there that you need to. And anyone else for that matter. So anyway, with that in mind, as I say, we'll kick off with an intro presentation from Ralf on behalf of his fellow co-authors, and then I'll roll through each of the other panel members, and then we'll take it from there. So I have Ralf's slides, which I will attempt to share. Right, I believe I'm sharing your slides, Ralf. Hopefully you can see them.
Yeah, that's good. Can see them.
So you tell me when you want me to move.
Yeah, just go to the second slide. I mean, this is just the intro. Are you changing?
I'm trying to change.
There. Okay, there it comes. So this was born. I mean, a lot of the people here on the call actually make a good living out of working on or with DNS, but there are also some stuff that are pain points for us because that maybe could be better or that we could improve. And so we got together with a huge group at the IETF in Prague and discuss what are the goals or requirements for evolution over DNS. I mean, DNS is great, but it's kind of like the principles are great, and we want to keep the principles, but there has to be some kind of a protocol overhaul every decade or so, maybe. At least that's what we see in other protocols, and I think DNS is overdue for that. And the kind of goals or requirements we set were we want to have something that is extensible so that we can add future innovation without changing the actual kind of enhancement that we do. And we have a couple of current problems. One is I mean, there's been a lot of innovation around DNS over TLS, HTTP, quick H3, I mean, carrier pages, what have you. So, but there's never been a way that to kind of include some of that within the DNS. So encryption to authority on the kind of recursive to authoritative side is a thing that people want, at least some, but we cannot do. And there also is a problem that, and that's sort of partially with decentralization of the internet, that a lot of providers run large amounts of zones for customers, but they are really not in the, how to say, business relationship that have formed around DNS. And this is a problem when you want to do DNSX especially. So there is something, if we could make that easier to do, that would be good. Now, of course, one of the cornerstones of all of this is it has to be compatible with the current DNS, because we know that a kind of big bang approach, okay, now use V1 and now use V2 is not possible. So we have to have a gradual kind of upgrade path. So we have to be compatible with what we currently have. And there's a lot of stuff about DNS that is good and that we don't want to change, like the distributed namespace, the management boundaries, and the principal data structures. So these are the things that we want to keep with the proposal that we have. And now go to the next slide. So when we sat together in Prague, we discussed this over 2 days, really, and with lots of inputs. And after these 2 days, we kind of came out with a proposal, which is, I mean, just discussion at the table. And we found out that, well, it's similar to what Tim Apel already has done with something called NS2 a couple of years ago. So we sort of took that draft and kind of amended it a bit, and that is the basis for the current draft. That is DELEG. Now to the next slide. So what is DELEG? Now, DELEG is a parent-side only SVCP style record. That means kind of like SVCP, which I believe is RC 9460, is something that gains more and more usage in kind of the web world, and it is an extensible record like we maybe had with SRV already in the, but it's a kind of different kind of extensibility. And we want to use that because clients, which we are interested in, are actually using that. And we want to have it parent side only because we need something at the parent side to create a zone cut. Currently, a zone cut is created by an S record, but the NAS record exists in the parent and the child, and that has caused, how you say, some problems or some discussions about that. We want to make that clear. DELEG is a record that can only exist in the parent side of the delegation, just like the S is. I mean, the S for the NSX is the same thing. It is kind of like parent side only. And as I said, extensible to allow additional parameters and to allow the interaction. Now, if you look on the right side, that's kind of like how current delegation is done. If you have an in domain or in bailiwick for the old guys, a domain, you have kind of like a record that points to a name server, and then you have the glue within the delegation. And in the new record, we want to make that all kind of put in one record. As you see, we have the ns1example.com, including the glue records, which are called SVCP IPv4 hints. Maybe we should rename that, but that's just, I mean, technicalities. So that means we have one record that gives the delegation, and that record can be signed in the parent. So there's no ambiguity, kind of like, this is the record we're going for. And the other, which is kind of like the operator use case, is out of domain or indirect. And here you just kind of point to an additional SVCP record. And you have the same SVCP stuff that they have in SVCP. Again, with the additional advantage that you can put multiple things within that record that you can use for kind of like going down the delegation chain. So next slide, please. So what needs to change for that to happen? Well, if you are running a current resolver, that's nothing. I mean, even a new kind of internet with DELEG records there has to be, I mean, some fallback using regular NS records. So nothing has to change, and the new stuff we're introducing has to work with old resolvers. And that's that one principle, and that's also something we already tested. Now, for modern use of DNS with DELEG, I mean, the DNS software needs to understand the record. The authority servers need to provide DELEG with NS or DS, and I mean also the appropriate proof of absence. And the zone owners need to have a DELEG, have a flag, and the DNS key flag is already something we've kind of changed over the course of the draft by when we do the code. And of course, the resolvers need to be aware of the record, fetch the record, and then use it for the delegation. So that's quite a lot that has to change. But again, as it is kind of like a sort of non-breaking change, it is something that I think is worth doing, because that if we kind of get down that and have it done, it'll allow us to do the further innovations without actually going to the same process again. Go to the next slide. So again, we've kind of proposed that draft as an outcome after the IETF 118. And I believe at the last IETF 119, there was a working group forming BOF where, I mean, a lot of people came there, we presented the stuff, other people presented other stuff that they want to do to kind of enhance delegation, because in the end, if you want to change something in the DNS and going forward, you have to do something about delegation, because that's the kind of main property of DNS, how you kind of make it scale so good. And I mean, the working group, I think, will be formed. I think they're looking for chairs at the moment. So hopefully we'll have one at the next IETF, and we hope that our draft that we are still currently working on will become working group document. As said, we did some testing. So we tested all the existing resolver software we could have had out there. What would happen if we would add DELEG records with a lot of different use cases? I mean, like signed, unsigned, delegation with or without. So all of these cases pretty much had the expected result. So that means we are pretty confident we can introduce DELEG without breaking anything else. We are all currently now working on the draft and also doing some kind of more, how do you say, operational work. So we wanted, I mean, having a draft is also theory. So I'm a sysadmin guy, so I only can work with stuff that I can sort of get on a terminal. So we are working on getting something done, and that way already has kind of created some change in the draft. And we hope to have a version 1 ready for the IETF 120 based on that, on the current experiments that we are doing. And that's it.
Great. And impressive timekeeping as well, Ralf. Covered a fair bit of ground in a short amount of time. So thank you for the scene set, the explanation. Hopefully that gives everyone some context in terms of how we got to here. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask 2, possibly 3. I haven't seen Jeff join yet, but at least 2 of the sort of key people from the sort of DNS world to give their takes sort of respectively on what they think from what they've seen so far from the discussion. And then, as I said, we'll open up to get comments and discussion more widely. So firstly then, if I could hand over Paul Mockapetris. So you have to be a Paul to have standing in the DNS community. That's a key requirement. So Paul Mockapetris first, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts, and then go over to Paul Vixie, and then see if Jeff has joined us after that.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of basic mechanisms in the DNS, and I always anticipated that some of them would get replaced as the system evolved and so forth. So I'm happy to see evolution. I'm not afraid of the camel. A lot of people are afraid of the camel, and I say, you know, if you look at the camel statistically, that means there's only been 2 or 3 ideas per year. new ideas about the DNS, which I think is pretty low. So I'm all in favor of doing the improvements. The one thing I'd like to yield a minute back to Ralf and say, you covered the who, what, when, where. I'm not sure whether I got the whole why. It seemed like the why of this was to be able to digitally sign some stuff and sort of improve the security. What are the other whys that this addresses?
Well, I mean, yeah, maybe the wise word. It's okay that I answer, or
Yeah, I'm giving you back a minute.
okay. That's
You
good.
have time. So
Yeah,
that
so
was
I mean, one of the why use case is the operator use case, and the other is kind of like so if you want to do DNSSEC and you are thinking about, well, what about post quantum? And there might be a point where we actually need to change the way how DNSSEC the packet format works, because the signatures might just too big for 64K, because that's the maximum stuff that we have at the moment. So, and the other problem was kind of like, if I want to have encryption between the recursor and the authority, there needs to be some signaling for that. And the natural way to do the signal is discover it during the delegation. And that's another motivation for that, because otherwise all the other stuff is kind of like more complex.
Okay. I guess I have two reactions, one of which is I suppose it's okay. I kind of wish you guys had gone a little more crazy. It seems like being able to automatically be able to petition to join a zone and have it happen all automatically if the parent wishes it to take place, or if there's some agreement. That's like a much more interesting thing. I think there's also the question about, the classical DNS navigation is all top down. It would be kind of interesting to see whether there's any kind of possibilities for bottom up or other things. So I guess this seems like an interesting incremental improvement. And so that's great. I wonder if there's, and it'd be nice if we could figure out how to do wild and crazy in the future.
Paul, just to interrupt, and this won't cost any of your time. I can see that Tal has his hand raised, possibly to add some additional crazy thoughts. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Tal.
exactly. So I will say that one of our additional motivations was definitely the possibility of being able to grease the skids, to being able to experiment with a new protocol that might have things like a new wire format, for example. Some of the constraints that we've been under, I mean, again, with all due respect, you made a fantastic system that I would say is one of the most successful, internet technologies that has existed for decades. But some things like name compression and packet sizes have been issues that people keep running into, that we consider the possibility of being able to extend the protocol even further in a way that is not beholden to the current format of the protocol. And one of the other things, while keeping the same namespace semantics, which we do think are key to how this whole thing is working. And personally, one of the things that I've been interested in is the issue with web browsers and how they have been extremely reluctant to adopt any DNS technology that means increasing their queries, and they're looking for ways to optimize DNS in their systems. And so one of the things I look at is the possibility where we could use the wonderful power of DNSSEC to provide signed answers and that you don't necessarily care where it came from. So, for example, a server that's contacted and says, hey, I'm visiting, www.example.com. The DNS could say, oh, you asked about that. You're almost certainly going to want images.example.com and so on. And your resolver could provide, a fully authenticated chain that proves that the records are just fine. So DNS push, I think, is another possible future that we look toward, which is one of the motivators for this, but not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a fundamental part of doing this right now.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to tell you my two fears. My first fear is that with the centralization of the DNS, eventually what you're going to do is you're going to say, we're going to tell you how to create a secure pipe to whoever the three providers are, just like the three credit bureaus in the US. And we're not going to have any of the security filling up the pipe. You just trust us. You have a secure connection to one of the three oligarch DNS providers, and don't worry about the rest of it. That's one of my fears. And then a higher order fear is that it all disappears into the web guys and mysteriously is no longer there. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. It may be there's just evolution to the next stage. But those are the two things that kind of bother me about all of this. I would hope that the DNS would continue to be a valuable way for people to exchange information. But we'll see.
And I feel that from the point of view of, I run my own mail server still, right? And in a world where so much of mail authentication has been centralized and trust in mail systems has kind of gone that route, I can still run my own mail system. And one of the things I love about the delegation model of the DNS is that even if the centralized resolver providers do it this way, the registrants still hold the keys to saying, here's what the data for our domain should be.
Well, I mean, the problem with that is that you need to be able to outsource some operations. And that's the dimension of this that is among, I think, the most forceful thing about centralization. When you put sufficient hair on something, then you have to hire an expert, and also with all the legalities. Anyway, I'm going to let other people speak. I've talked enough.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Sorry, I got some, I think, mildly enthusiastic was my takeout from that, but we'll see. Let's hand over to the other Paul Vixie, your long lost twin brother, and see if he shares your perspective or has a slightly different take on the proposal so far. So,
which
Paul
one
Vixie.
of us is Danny DeVito? Which one of us is Schwarzenegger? Oh well.
I hadn't thought about that. That's brilliant. Yes.
I think that you will always be the taller. So thank you. And thanks for an opportunity to sort of have this, in some ways, offline discussion that's outside the IETF process and is likely to be a little more free-flowing. So I do have a different perspective, and it comes from just what it's like to operate this thing, and sort of how many people have to do how many things in order that DNS has a good day for most of us. So looking at DNSSEC through the cold light of dawn, we can see that there is still not much demand for it. And to the extent that registrars, registries, and so forth even allow you to input a DS record, it's still somewhat flaky. It's a bolt-on. So I think we can generalize back to some mistakes that I think DNSSEC has made. And one is to put the DS record at the delegation point. This required that anybody who is looking at data for a delegation point that they knew was a delegation point would know that DS doesn't get delegated. It remains in the parent. And that causes some confusion. The assumption that once delegation occurs, all records are to be found at the delegation is encoded pretty deeply and implicitly. In other words, there is often not a comment in the code saying, by the way, delegation has occurred, therefore we're always, no, that's implicit in the system. We should not have changed that for DS. It should have been a cousin domain with some kind of introduction like underbar DNSSEC.parent, so that it was clear that this was part of the parent, was signed in the parent, and would not be also available at the child. I think that should be done here. There is something that probably the proto-draft addresses, but which was not in Ralph's presentation, and that is the question, how synthetic are these NS records in the parent? In other words, if some old style chain validating, diagnostic tool was to go looking for an NS record at the delegation point, but was to ask that question of the parent, would they receive the normal delegation response, or would they receive an actual NS answer? Need to make sure that any pre-existing diagnostic tool does not have its assumptions violated. And I think that means you answer with a delegation, but that may still be a matter of controversy to some. The other concern I have is virality. A lot of us are old enough to remember when the internet was a network of networks, and that first you would build your network and you would operate it, and you would have whatever services and uses. And then once you had that network, you thought, my network would be more valuable to me if other people could reach it, and if through my network I could reach other networks. And then you would make a connection between the primary autonomous unit, which is your network, and this secondary hierarchical entity called the internet. Now, I realize that is not the assumption today. The assumption today is that the internet is a network of human eyeballs to be monetized. And so most networks are just there. They are only there to access the rest of the internet, or to be accessed by the rest of the internet. And there is no thought of some utility that a network might have if it were not connected. Nevertheless, there are a lot of companies, government agencies, individuals who still operate that way. And to see DELEG is interesting. I share that view with the taller Paul, but the idea that you could only learn the things expressed by a DELEG record in the payload there, that you could only learn those if a delegation were to occur, will make things harder for those of us who also have completely disconnected services, disconnected networks, or some part of our network that is only meant to be reached internally. So just as DELEG is going to have trouble expressing, let's say, a DOT preference or DOT availability for the root zone, because there is no delegation to the root zone, so it is that some subdomain of my own or some private thing under .local or whatever is going to have trouble, because every recursive name server that I want to have access that undelegated material will have to have configuration in the recursive config file to say, as today, it has to say it's likely to be signed with a key that you can't find on the chain. Here's how you can find it. Now we're also going to have to say, and these are the things that a DELEG record would have told you had this been a delegation. I'd like to avoid that. I think we've learned a lesson by how hard that is in DNSSEC, that we ought to have, if we're going to be able to express things with a DELEG record in a parent, we ought to have that included in any NS response from the child, so that if you are disconnected, you can still express your preferences and your hints and all the normal things. So in other words, I think I disagree with the idea of a parent-only record for delegation. I think there is ample benefit to be had from repeating at least some of this information in the child. And so, I mean, I have a third concern, which appears to be addressed. I'll get to that in a second, but I just want to summarize those two concerns. Let's not put any more records in the parent that are located at the delegation point itself. DS was a mistake. Second, if we're truly going to treat this as high enough utility to be worth sort of walking out to the camel and feeding it more stuff, let's not make it parent only. I realize the existence of a delegation point is important for people to know, but the capabilities of the name servers like DOT are also important for the child to be able to express. And that's partly because of the incredibly long tail on adding a new type of delegation in every registry and every registrar on the planet. That took 15 years for DNSSEC on the DS record. We can expect it to take that long here. If we want to get these benefits in the short term, then we have to be able to do this using only child upgrades or child plus recursive upgrades, and not also demand that the parents all be upgraded. Lastly, I want to talk about sort of the other long tail. The DELEG record looks like it will effectively replace the NS record in the parent. I'm assuming that the NS records for a delegation point in an upgraded parent, the DELEG is all you will have to have there. It will not also be necessary to put into the zone the actual NS records, because the parent will recognize, hey, if there's a DELEG, then I get to synthesize the NS records. I no longer need those. That's fine. But it gives rise to a configuration problem, potential, almost inevitable configuration problem, which is that this works so well that people forget that there are unupgraded recursives, or they don't forget, they just say, well, it's been 10 years and I'm only getting like 0.5% of my total queries are from parents that don't understand DELEG. And so we just forget that these NS records are also necessary. I think we have to make a strong statement in all the work that proceeds from these assumptions, which is that an unupgraded client is forever. And we must always ensure that these NS records are not only present, but that they're accurate. Somebody might say at some point, yeah, I'm delegating to name servers that understand DOT. We like DOT. We've solved the TCP scaling problems. We don't really care about the old way of accessing the content. And so we're not going to provide what I guess is now called DOUDP or whatever, basically classic DNS. We're no longer going to provide that in our name servers. I don't want to see that. I really want it to be that something about this proposal reminds people, yeah, you can only list name servers that also speak the classic protocol, or that in the DELEG record itself, you have a hint that says, by the way, don't give out this NS record because it only speaks DOT. And we would not want an NS record floating around out there that referred to a name server that does not speak DNS as it was classically known. And so, for that reason, we might want to also, in all work that proceeds from this, we might want to remind people at least one and preferably two of the name servers that you are delegating to should speak the old protocol, and there should be some hint so that when the parent is synthesizing NS records, it only synthesizes NS records that speak the old protocol, because the old protocol is forever. So those are my three concerns. I appreciate the amount of work that has gone into this, and wish I could have been there to be part of that discussion, but IETF meetings are kind of out of reach for me at the moment. So I'm happy to join the discussion.
Thank you, both Pauls. I think a lot of sort of breadth of comments there, which I think is fantastic. Good to hear a need for more crazy. wasn't expecting to hear that today, but that was good to hear. I think hair dropped in there as well somewhere along the way. Backwards compatibility and being mindful of the long tail and a lot of other stuff. What I don't think, I'll just double check, I don't think I've seen Jeff come on. So why don't I ask either of, I think at least two of the co-authors are on here. So let me put you on the spot and see if Ralf or Taylor, if either of you got any comments back on that, and then I'll open up more widely to everybody else to see what other questions and comments people have.
I've got one for Mr. Vixie, unless Ralf wants to go first.
You can go first, that's fine.
I was just going to say, Paul, we share those concerns. And so that is absolutely something like that last part about, you know, if we're going to synthesize records, make sure that you don't synthesize records for only talking to a dot server. We have a parameter in the record that basically says, you know, here are the transports that are available at this name server. And therefore, you should, you would only make those NS records. Also, we're going to put adequate warnings around the whole, and if you don't provide DO 53, which is what kind of the common term around the ITF has been for the conventional DNS, you know, that if you don't make DO 53 available, you will be cutting off clients who are not updated. And we do think that some features of this will lead to DNSSEC absolutely had a long tail. It was absolutely hard to tell people, oh, you should add this thing that might break your DNS because it's going to give you better security at the same time as creating new operational risks. We think that that this new delegation mechanism could be providing enough desirable features that will encourage rapid adoption of it in much the same way that DO DNS over HTTPS was rapidly adopted by people that saw the interest in it. So the long tail is going to be there. We don't deny it. There's going to be resolvers that are still doing DO 53, you know, 30 years from now, and that's the only thing they know how to speak. But we are somewhat optimistic that the features of this, including its drop-in availability against the existing operational internet, will help ease the transition into being able to talk the new protocol, and that will have features that will make people want to talk the new protocol.
So, Tail, you did not also say that the team agrees with the idea that a child ought to be able to express these extensions even if nothing delegates to it.
Right. So that actually is something that has come up. It's been a little bit of a discussion because in fact, going back to the original discussions, have personally been in favor that like there's some hierarchies. There's some CCTLDs that still don't do DNSSEC, right? And this is why we had DLV for a little while. I think that we should be able to do, you know, have a child be able to assert, hey, look, even though my parent is stuck in the dark ages, we know how to do the new business. And so I actually very much agree with you that this should be something that a child is able to assert. And in some ways, part of that is already there with the way that DELEG actually allows pointing to the service B record, which is controlled at the apex, or it doesn't need. So the child can have records that asserts what its name server's desired attributes are. So it is, you know, it still needs some refinement, but you know, there are the hooks in there for it.
So the problem, the implicit assumption in the original system that complicates that is that the child almost never tells you anything that you did not ask for. And so the idea of, for example, including an SOA record and the NS records in negative responses is exceptional. And what it's going to be hard to do without an additional query is figure out some time at which the delegation, the child's capabilities can be expressed to a recursive name server, even though the recursive name server does not have the desire to make an extra round trip to ask about that. So knowing when to send it in a way that will arrive early enough to affect operations.
That's right. So
that's the hard nut. Let me give you
Yeah,
one
and
last
so you
question.
used to
Let's just
have the
keep
way,
going.
which is why you are I believe your co-author on the draft that says, oh, you should do parent-side revalidation every once in a while of the delegating NSs, right? And so like historically, we did have the situation before we came up with shorter, negative answers instead of root referrals, where the NS record set that was introduced in from a child response could be cached by resolvers. And so one possibility that has not been worked on, but is this idea that a name server that is responding, for example, over it gets a request over DO53 and it says, hey, I know how to speak dot and DO, so I would like to also provide these service B records for you in the additional section, that a modernized resolver that recognizes those additional answers could then use that as a forking point.
So I appreciate that, but it's still a hard nut to crack, because you're not going to want to include that material in every positive response. What you want to do is include it early enough that subsequent positive responses can benefit from the new capabilities, and recognizing that this is early and should be included rather than I've already told them. That's tough. And I know certainly at least one CDN provider finds it very difficult to answer with more than 512 octets. And as a result, they are already omitting certain parts of the DNSSEC responses, just, like proof of non-wildcard type things, because they're challenged by that old 512 octet limit. That's going to make it really difficult to argue. By the way, always include this in case the recursor that you're telling it to gets an upgrade and understands that these other records are possible. So in other words, we may need another flag bit in EDNS to say, by the way, I would understand this if you would just tell me. So that really broadens the discussion. And while I have you on the line, can you tell me how you expected this to work for the root zone, which is either self-delegated or undelegated, depending on sort of what your graph theory tells you?
Ralph, I would say my short answer was we didn't expect the root to do really anything other than DO53 right now, right?
The root zone, I mean, I'm going to sort of, get the root zone first and then do some other stuff, because I might disagree with some stuff that Dale said. But the root zone is just data. I mean, to be honest, nobody should go out to a root server today. The data is small enough to just put it in a server and deal with it. That's my point on that. So from there on, everything is delegation. So the other thing I want to say is that one of the reasons why I think myself, maybe also Peter, are so kind of amended on doing that parent side is that I've been operating a recursive DNS service for decades now. And we found that whenever, I mean, the parent has in the DNS the ultimate authority to either you get there or you don't get there. Anything you do at the child is a kind of like maybe a mud over a problem that exists and might bite you at one point. So that's why I think kind of having this record on the parent side and having it signed that it has the authority that sort of the current NS stuff sort of didn't have will make a much cleaner, resolution process. And that to me is a good thing, because a lot of the problems you deal with when you run recursive resolver is I can't run domain X, and having that a bit more consistent as it is now would be good.
So Ralph, let me just, I want to drag this in so that everybody on the call gets a chance to hear it. If this proposal encodes your assumption that the root zone is only data and everybody should just fetch it.
This proposal has nothing to do with the root zone. That's just a different, that's just how I run my recursive resolver. Because for me, the root zone is just data.
You spoke words, and your words were, the root zone is just data. Recursives ought to be caching that and not ever having to make a query to the root. If any part of this proposal encodes that assumption, then that will be a moment of high controversy leading to a huge discussion, because there are people who have the opposite assumption, and they're not going to want to see concrete poured around the house you're building that causes the future to be constrained in that way. Keep in mind, there are people who really would like top-level domain expansion to be more like .com. They want there to be millions of these things, not hundreds or thousands. And keep in mind, there are, at the last survey, about 30 million recursive name servers, many of which are in middle boxes that the source code's been lost, the vendor's dead, will never be upgraded. But even if they all wanted to cache a copy of this, that creates a lot more configuration state. And the law of large numbers tells us that in that world, the number of operational impacting errors per unit time will drastically increase. I think we have to treat the root zone the way that the traditional system treated it. And in that sense, we need a way to introduce information about a zone, such as what is the root zone's key, and what is the equivalent of a DS record. That currently has to be hard-coded into the config file of a recursive, although many of the modern recursives are capable of sort of gradually learning new keying material there. We have to be able to do something similar for other information about a zone, including the root zone, that cannot be heard from a delegator because there isn't one. Now, I mentioned in my response to Tail that the idea of disconnected operation, or maybe something where you are wanting to use these features before your parent is capable of expressing them on your behalf, we may need new signaling to say, by the way, I, as a recursive name server, am capable of understanding this other information if you chose to send it to me. That might be fine, because then the root zone could inform the world by itself. By the way, this is my information. And it would be very interesting to see how that affected root zone key role as well. So these are all interlocked, and it's necessary when you come up with a proposal for changing this distributed system that you understand which implicit assumptions you are encoding in and which of those are changes, right? We didn't understand that when we added the DS record, and we blew it. We must do better this time. I'm going to shut up for a while.
No, I mean, I'm not sure if I agree on the DS record, because again, there has to be some signal. But again, I don't want to. So we have RFC of 8860.
Wait a minute, Ralph. What I said about the DS record is not that it shouldn't exist, but its name should not have, the owner name of the DS record should not have been the delegation point itself. You know, instead of having vix.com DS in the com zone, there should have been, you know, ds._dnssec.com, so that the com zone had a namespace with which to express this type of ancillary information that did not overlap with the delegation point itself. That would have simplified the rollout of DNSSEC, and we should do something like that here. That's all I meant. Not that there shouldn't have been a DS record, that we should not have used the same name.
On the other stuff, I mean, having something, as you said, is at the child or at the side. I think the historical kind of like precedents that we have with DLV, for instance, show that a lot of this stuff where we actually try to do stuff in child or the side failed because it is kind of like unrelated. Whereas the relationship with the parent always is there, because without a delegation from the parent, you're nowhere. Or you have local configuration, which of course you can do all the time. But I think, I mean, taking advantage of this kind of like basic DNS mechanism of the delegation, rather than trying to do stuff on other sides, for me is more logical than having an additional level of kind of interaction.
I'm going to jump in there, and I'm not going to read out everything in the chat unless it looks like it's a definite question. So there's maybe a couple of things I will read out, and then I'll see if anyone wants to actually come to the mic and ask a question, raise your hand. Kurt, I'll come to you first to see if you still have a question, as you were waiting patiently previously. So if you do, you'll get the first opportunity. And then if anyone who can't come to the mic literally wants to put a question in the chat, do that and I'll read it out. But I'll try and take these in order if possible. So the first sort of comment stroke question I'll just read out is, I'm curious whether DELEG shifts any meaningful level of control over the child's own to the parent, from Suzanne. So I don't know, it's probably Ralf or Tail, maybe to...
I think that the parent already has the authority to not kind of delegate you. And we've seen kind of like takedowns are often from the parent. Someone kind of has a warrant, then the domain gets taken down from the parent. So the parent already has the kind of like capability to shut you down. What we are really merely adding is an additional parameter to the relay. I mean, currently there's the NS record and maybe the glue IPs. And in the future, there's the additional DELEG record. So I don't think there's any shift, kind of like maybe on a political wise. The capability already was there. Nothing changes.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks, Ralf.
There was a comment from Killian. How about just recommending RSC 8806?
Yeah,
Killian,
I had the number on. That was one of what I was actually referring to.
Fair enough. Okay. Cheap comment, Georgia is going to leave in 5 minutes. I won't come to you, Georgia, as you wouldn't come to me on the call on Monday. We had that discussion separately. Just kidding, by the way. That was also a good discussion as well. Okay, right. Kurt, you patiently had your hand raised for a bit, and then you put it down again. I'll come to you then, Patrick, and then see who else maybe wants to say anything.
Yes, I was actually kind of suggesting this talk because I think this is quite interesting how a change in this system could actually be done. And Paul's confirming my view that this is the core of internet operations, basically. And it's not easy to change anything there because there are so many dependencies on this. There are some statements are really, they stuck in my head, like things are forever. That's, I think the internet is for innovation and new things get actually accepted and deployed, but still you need to respect how to deal with things that are not upgradable. And this made me think a lot of, let's say, how do we do this in general with new things to introduce? Like Quick is just adding on TCP and replacing things with security, blah, blah, blah. Nevertheless, some things are really there for long term, be it 7-bit cleanliness for mails. You have still 7-bit. I have to explain it to the new generation why 7-bit, blah, blah, blah. DELEG for me is worth trying in, let's say, in an environment to see what implications it will. I'm curious to see what it will do. It should be beneficial, but still I don't understand all implications with it. And this is why I'm struggling with both directions, yes and no, and try it or not, because it's so core. That's my statement.
Okay, I think that's a fair comment. Maybe we need to try harder to get more people with sort of hardcore operational experience engaged in the IETF discussion, because I think for the IETF community generally, we're light on people with that operational understanding. That's not specifically on the DNS side. That's sort of more generally, that's a deficit in my view. Ralf, did you want to comment on that before I?
Yes,
yeah,
I fully
okay.
agree with what Kurt has said. I mean, and we've, as the authors and of the draft, already learning stuff when we try to codify it, and then we see some stuff works, some stuff doesn't. So I fully agree. I mean, there was also in the IETF once, I mean, code, show me the running code, and we are trying to work on that while we develop the proposal.
Yeah, Great, thank you. Patrick, I know you had your hand raised a short while ago. Did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I would like to provide another perspective coming from the registration path instead of the resolution path. And it's more like a rhetorical question, because I don't think there is an answer to that right now, but I think it's important for people to have that on the radar. If imagine all that proposal goes through everything, all technical details are resolved and whatnot, you put something in the parent. But then the question is how you put it in the parent. In the current model, it means going through a registrar. Okay, there is an EPP extension being worked on to give all that data. My experience of more than 20 years in EPP is that having an extension is not enough for people to implement it. So my rhetorical question is that if everything exists, all that DELEG records and everything around it, how do you manage to convince registrars to provide basically user interface on API for people to manage all of that? I know that for DNSSEC, there are proposals on methods to like bootstrap things on like send stuff to the registry without having to go through the registrar. Maybe something equivalent can happen for DELEG records. But even if that exists, it means the registry has to work with that, and not all of them will do. So to conclude, DNSSEC was helped by the fact that I can require it on registrar, on registries. But for this new proposal, I would just emphasize to make sure people remember that there will be something to do at the registrars, and not all of them will see any kind of benefit in implementing all of that. So you might have a problem there on just how you push the information to the parent. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Ralf, did you want to come in on that?
Yes. So, I mean, we are fully aware of the problem. The good thing is, though, that if you look at the contributors list and on the people that are actually working on the proposals, we have people from registrars, registries, and whatever kind of wanting to support this. The sort of, I think, carrot that we sort of might put out there is the much easier maybe delegation model for the registrar using DELEG. And the much easier way, I mean, we don't have that ready in the draft yet, but that the idea is to have a much easier way to doing DNSSEC. So we hope that some of this sort of carrots will help. And I don't want to get in the other discussion. I mean, we have people that want to work on that. And I don't think that, I mean, a lot of the proposals out there for other stuff like automatic updates so far haven't gone anywhere. But if they would ever work, they would also work with DELEG, of course.
Thanks for that. I think we've maybe lost Tool, Paul. Otherwise, I was going to ask you to comment on your point in the chat. Yeah, we have. So Paul in the chat put, there's always going to be the possibility that the parent and the child have differing information about the delegation. Possibly the best solution is to work on automatic convergence over time. I was going to ask Paul to expand on that, but unfortunately he's got a diary conflict and has dropped off. So I just wanted to at least draw your attention to that, as there's a lot of comments in the chat and it's easy to miss something. Eric has put a question in the chat. Instead of extending DNS and adding complexity to existing systems, why not start with a new protocol and infrastructure? Could applications take advantage of desired features in a new system and fall back to DNS? Throw that out to anyone, not just well, the authors, Paul Vixie. I don't know if you've any thoughts on, should we be looking at moving on to an alternative to DNS at this stage? Has it served its purpose?
So I'll jump in and say this is, of course, what things like ENS and other blockchain-based naming systems have done, and I've been super critical of those on previous calls and so on. That again, like one of the things that has been really valuable in keeping the DNS going all these years has been the distributed nature of responsibility and the hierarchical model of the domain name system, and the processes that have developed around it, like the UDRP and other governance issues. I think that while it's one of those things that, like, yes, it's possible that there's another system out there that could be even better, but none is evident right now as something that you know, that is going to get any kind of traction to move to.
So I would echo that, but I think there's a more important reason why DNS has worked, and that we ought to be careful about sort of killing the goose that's laying the golden eggs. Having a universal namespace where a company like ICANN is able to encode as their mission statement, you know, one internet, has been huge. And various, before TLD expansion, there were various operators who innovated by creating a new thing that ICANN didn't know about. It wasn't in the root zone, but if you could get some recursive name server to sort of hard code your information, then you could nevertheless start selling names under something that looked like a TLD, but it wasn't. Famously, there was somebody who thought the .sex ought to exist years before it actually did. And the only recursive name server that I ever touched that was hard-coded to use it was the Wi-Fi at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. And it was a very strange experiment that taught us that, yeah, unity is pretty important. However, I want to caution against virality. There will always be networks that are not connected. We should not make it really super hard for somebody. And here's another example. I got into an elevator at Google maybe 10 years ago, and I saw that there were posters, you know, saying, hey, we're going to have whatever, HR is going to come talk to us about the free lunch program or something like that. The URLs were all .google, which did not at that time exist. But of course, Google controlled all the recursives that you were ever likely to touch as an employee, and so they caused it to exist. There is a lot of that. And to the extent that the IETF does not completely enough represent the operational namespace, we have the risk of creating what amounts to ivory tower proposals that are incompatible with how the IP protocol suite is actually used. We should not assume that everything that will ever be advertised or consumed over these protocols is part of the existing system. Nevertheless, the importance of the existing system has also been demonstrated. So that's a fine line to walk.
And I want to now also back up Paul on that. I once gave a talk to the ITU when there were whisperings about the possibility that the domain namespace might better be served by being under control of the ITU on the value of the one unified root and how, you know, it is part of what makes the internet work so well. So.
Yeah, starting with a new one feels like a bold but possibly risky approach. In the chat, I think this is a question from Killian. Isn't the DNS prefix over quick possibly already opening the L7 push update path once the service has been initially discovered? This is to do with prefetch. So are the current browsers even reevaluating these answers through regular DNS for the sake of validating them with the traditional chain of namespaces? I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that at all, or just take it as a comment.
Well, I actually can say, as having been past chair of the DOE working group and you know, now with ADD, I can say that there is definitely one of the interests from the browser vendors has been this idea of prefetch for a long time. And that was part of the reason that they thought that DOE was going to help them along that path. But as yet, there is no defined protocol that, or even, undefined ad hoc protocol that the browser vendors are using to get that sort of behavior. So, but it still is a goal that we could be working to in the IETF to enable.
Yeah, I have to say, channeling my some comments from a previous discussion on prefetch related to some thoughts how Chrome might evolve. I think it certainly raised some privacy concerns. So if anyone wants to revisit that, we can maybe dig those notes back out. But I know when Chrome was considering doing their sort of an automatic prefetch of everything, not everyone was wildly enthusiastic about the idea. So just maybe bear that in mind. Okay, does anyone else have any other questions who's not had a chance to raise them yet? And if so, either raise your hand or pop something into the chat. I will extract the chat and include that with with the notes on the landing page, so you're all able to read those at your leisure as well, because there's a lot of good comments in there. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands raised, so let's do this in reverse order. So Paul, give you a chance for any final thoughts first, then I'll go to Ralph, and then let's see what time we've got left to wrap up anything else beyond this discussion. So Paul first.
There are two Don Pauls. Which one do you refer?
No, the other Paul tall Paul has disappeared. So
oh, okay. So again, I think this has been a useful discussion. I'm happy to have been invited to sort of share some views and hear some views, because the IETF, to the extent that a working group is going to be formed, it's probably not going to be as usefully unstructured as this has been. I do want to just try somehow to reiterate the importance of understanding the assumptions that are encoded with the proposal, and for one thing, mentioning them in the specification, and for another, making sure that they are well discussed by a larger audience. I've been part of a lot of small audiences where, because none of us knew how something was being used, we made what seemed like a reasonable but turned out to be a very ignorant proposal. So a change of this magnitude needs broad review by the community, all the way up to ACM and IEEE and a bunch of people who are never going to read an RFC in their lives, but who are building products that depend on the assumptions. So we must treat ourselves as the tip of an iceberg. And again, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Paul. Ralph, last word on this, on behalf of the authors. No pressure.
No, I mean, agree with Paul. I mean, it is something that kind of like an initial proposal, and we know that with the forming of the working group and that hopefully becoming a document, that there will be changes to it, that there will be discussions, and I'm all for reaching out. I mean, we already, as the authors, I mean, Tail did a great job. I think he presented that RIPE and probably OARC and somewhere else. I probably don't remember, but I mean,
I'll just interrupt and say real quickly. So yes, we're doing the outreach. And so I want to just ask Paul, if you have ways to outreach to like ACM and IEEE, fantastic, please let us know. But yes, I've been presenting at RIPE and NANOG to try to bring the operator community into the discussion as well.
So we are open to input.
I know you're open to input, but what I'm asking for is outreach, and I can help a little, but this should be treated as something that first order of business for any working group would be to make sure we know how we're going to socialize this, so that we actually get comments from people who will care that it happened, but will not know that it's happening. And, as an example, a bunch of open source DNS operators sat on a panel at an OARC meeting in Bangkok and announced a proposal about message sizes and fragmentation. And there was not actually a call for input. It was an announcement. So anyone who had concerns simply had to swallow them. If we do that again, it will have deleterious effects on the reputation of the protocol development community. Let's not.
So outreach early and often, I think, is the message from that, which is a good message. Ralf, anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, that's a good. I mean, again, we are trying to do that already, and we are, I mean, we are more than happy if we get help to do more of it.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you to Paul and Mr. Vixie as well for coming on and sharing your thoughts, and for the co-authors. That's much appreciated. I will make the recording available shortly, as I say, as well as I'll do some light editing, as I generally do, of the any comments in the chat, and put those in as well. So yeah, I hope that was useful for everyone. I'm just going to briefly cover a few sort of recent news headlines and so on. And then if time at the end, which there should be, we may have a couple of minutes before hour for any other comments on anything else anyone wants to make under any other business. And everyone's welcome to stay on all the way through if your diaries allow. But if they don't, I will certainly understand that. Okay, right. So I'm going to do this quickly because I don't want to spend too much time on it, but just to share a few things briefly, some recent developments that caught my eye. We sort of touched on this on the call, I think, a couple of weeks ago, but the Zero Trust DNS announcement from Microsoft from a week back. There's continued to be some comments in the press, so I've put a link on the slide to the original announcement, plus some of the more recent comments. That seems to be generating a fair amount of interest. Tommy Jensen will be giving a presentation on this on the 3rd of June on this call. So if you, I think, and he may bring one or two of his colleagues on the call as well. So anyone's got any questions on that, you can ask them directly of Tommy in a couple of weeks' time or so. Other things that I'm going to call out, so I'm not going to do everything on every slide, it would take too long. Firefox for Enterprise version 119 has got support for encrypted client hello within the browser. And I also saw a reference to support for encrypted client hello, or ECH, in curl. So you'll see a link to that as well for anyone that has an interest in ECH and curl specifically. There's an interesting research paper presented, which I see I've mangled the link, which is annoying. So the research paper, which is at the top of the slide, and the link's correct, but the comment under it is wrong. So it is about fingerprinting of characteristics in encrypted network traffic. It's interesting. It's slightly dated. In fact, it's those two bullet points are mixed up. So the top two. So the comment is on the second one. I'll tidy that up later. It's interesting, but it's focused on TLS 1.2. So if it's extended sort of further, it could become useful. But obviously, it's on the last version, not the current version of TLS. To try and detect malicious traffic within an encrypted stream. So I thought it was an interesting research paper. And then the other one, just to try and unpack my two mangled bullet points, is in the Graphene OS. There's a new feature to block DNS leaks by third-party VPN apps, which has been a problem that's sort of surfaced over the last month or so, with a number of different VPNs leaking DNS data. So apparently that's if you use Graphene, then apparently that's they've got a feature to switch that off, so it's less of a risk. I don't think there's anything else that's going to call out directly on this slide. As I say, I'll share all this so you can look at it at your leisure. The other two things that caught my eye, I thought it was quite funny that Budweiser has bought beer.eth or ETH. So this is on the EDS as opposed to the DNS, as well as Rocket as well. Yeah, I thought it was mildly amusing. Some of us might question whether Budweiser is the rightful owner of beer.eth or whether that's comedy more than anything else, but depends on your beer preferences, whether that's an appropriate thing for Budweiser to own or not. And then the other one I mentioned just at the bottom of the screen is there's a sort of link to the agenda for the NANOG 91 meeting in a few weeks' time, and I did note that amongst many other interesting topics on the agenda is an update on ITF activities that's DNS related, which a certain Dave Lawrence, I believe, is going to be presenting on that. I don't know if DELEG will come up in that again. Possibly it might, no doubt, amongst other things. So that's NANOG 91 shortly. And then there was a sort of vast amount of other stuff, not least of which one at the top of this slide, where the RSA, in fact, last week, the US Secretary of State launched the new International Cyberspace and Digital Policy Strategy. Seemed entirely apt that was launched at RSA. I think it was entirely coincidental, to be fair, but in the keynote, one of the first keynotes on the Monday. So he handed off a quite a nice coup to the RSA meeting that it was sort of announced there by him in person. As I say, there's probably too many other things in the interest of time to go through this week, but I'll share those for your perusal later if you didn't already get them on the mailing list. So moving on, in terms of deadlines that are coming up, we haven't got any imminent ones. There was a few deadlines for papers for conferences, but they've now passed. So the next one I'm aware of is the ICANN grant program, which closes on the 24th of May. So if you've got aspirations to apply for an ICANN grant, you've got a week and a half or so to get your application in if you've not already done so. And then you'll see you've got various other deadlines coming up, but all of those have got a reasonable amount of time. Again, plenty of meetings still on the schedule. The two that I mentioned remind me the next ITF meeting is not so far away now, 20th to 26th of July. I haven't looked at the number of registered attendees recently. When I last checked, it was about 300, so it seemed to be building up nicely. And I'm confident that DELEG will be one of the agenda items. I don't know if there'll be another BOF at this point. Did it pass the working group forming BOF last time, or would that be the next?
It did. Warren's going to be the AD. They are still, I don't know if a final decision has been made, but they were in the scaring up some working group chairs.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot that Warren and Eric put that out, didn't they? Asking for volunteers or nominations of other people. So yeah, I'm sure that will be on the agenda for Vancouver, amongst many other things. Also, much more imminently than that, this time next week, we complete sort of gear shift. We've been talking about the impact of NIS2 on the domain name industry, which Michael will lead the discussion on that. So more on the policy and regulatory side rather than the technical side next week. So just say a bit of a change of gear, which should be an interesting discussion, because I think a lot of people aren't paying attention to NIS2, which comes into force in early October for the EU and does impact on the domain name industry, amongst others. It's quite wide-reaching, in fact. So if you're not familiar with that, it's certainly worth listening into Michael's presentation. Again, the other ones you can sort of catch up with at your leisure. And then, 3rd of June, as I mentioned, we'll have Tommy on as well. So Michael next week. We won't have a call the following week because there's a public holiday in quite a few countries. So I have to be NIS2 and Michael, followed by Zero Trust DNS with Tommy, be the next couple of calls. Okay, right. So we're now on any other business. So let me stop sharing and see if in the last 5 minutes anyone's got anything else you want to mention. It looks like I've maybe got a missing one on one of those on one of those dates. So yeah, I'll double check that. Thank you for flagging that.
I put it in the chat, but just going back to the comment about the ether beer.eth, I think that's defensive. I don't think that I think that's a really big jump to take that and say, oh, businesses are really jumping on this as though it's some great thing. It's defensive. They buy a lot of domain names simply for defensive reasons. I mean, I remember when I was on the enterprise side, we had thousands of domains. We didn't want to have them, but we needed to.
Yeah. I know from the DNS Research Federation research into blockchain sort of domains or blockchain domain name services rather. Apparently, a lot of consumer brands have been the most active in acquisition, probably for defensive reasons, as you say. To be fair, that only caught my eye because I thought there was maybe a certain irony in Budweiser owning beer.eth, but.
Yep. Definitely entertaining for sure.
On beer, but not a serious comment for the avoidance of doubt. Okay, I can see there've been a lot of comments in the chat whilst I've been chatting, which I won't try and catch up on live, but I will pull those out post call. So, and anyone else got anything that you want to mention before we wrap this discussion up? If so, put it in the chat or raise your virtual hand now if you wish to. I'm not seeing either at the moment. Okay, in which case with sort of 4 minutes to spare, so that's not bad given the breadth of discussion. So thank you both Pauls, one of whom in person, the other one will perhaps see the recording virtually. So thank you both for joining and sharing your thoughts and taking this in a range of different directions. Thank you for Ralf stepping in to the breach on behalf of the co-authors to set the scene, and then both you and Tal for sort of pitching in with your sort of top of head comments to some of the points made by the two Pauls. I hope that's been a useful discussion, and hopefully that will lead in to maybe sort of help us when we do get into the working group session in Vancouver, with luck, to help to make sure things aren't overlooked, such as the outreach point, which since I do participate in the outreach EODIA as it is a group covers outreach and education, I'll certainly take that on as a particular point, Paul, because I think it is valid that we should assume, because it's been discussed in the ITF, that's the job done. And not wait for people to come to us, rather sort of go proactively to them is a good point. Okay, so thank you all for your time. I hope that was useful. Make sure everyone's up to speed properly on DELEG, and look forward to some more meaningful discussions on that over the coming week. So have a fantastic rest of this week, and look forward to seeing you again next Monday to talk about all things NIS2 related. So see you all then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for facilitating it, Andrew.
Thanks.
Bye.